I said that I always thought Poland was Eastern European. All that got a lot of backlash. So today we're going to find out from 400 plus thousand people where they think the line between the East and West of Europe lies.
Europe might not be the biggest continent, but it's home to a vast array of people and cultures from, depending on how you count it, about 46 different countries. With that many countries, it's often useful to group them together when discussing them. The Mediterranean nations, or maybe the Nordic countries, or maybe even the less geographical Frugal Four. But the most common way of splitting is a simple East-West. But where do you draw the line? Especially considering both terms hold some serious baggage.
So what I learnt from Polish people that for technically, Poland is central, okay? If you look at the map, Poland, for example, is central. But I think yes and no, that also comes with the idea of what people think of those countries. So like this has just said, you've got, for example, the Nordic countries. Well, they sort of have all the same sort of characteristics. Now, when it's Eastern or Western, it brings up ideas of, for example, communism and that sort of situation. And the Western is more democratic, for example. So yes, it's partly that and partly simply where the line is, but it's a tricky one. And for Poland, who, let's be honest, are trying to move away from that Soviet regime that was controlling the country, a lot of them don't want to be called Eastern European, which makes sense because the thoughts that come to people's heads. So it makes sense.
So let's discuss the split. If there really is a geographical divide in Europe and where the line ought to be drawn. Before we get going, a quick thank you to everyone who's watched the channel in 2021 and helped us more than double in size. Ooh. But if you're not yet subscribed, hit the button to get more from us in 2022 and
They're doing
beyond.
even better this year.
When it comes to drawing a dividing line, unfortunately for us, there's no clear definition of Eastern and Western European.
I've got to show this. So this is what I think a lot of people and what I had in my head is that Russia. So when you have, look, all of this is Russia, and you almost forget how big Russia is. So actually, took Russia off, that is a pretty accurate central line. Now, we're obviously not realizing that Russia does exist, although some people may not want it to. It does exist, and it is vast. So, yeah, I think that's just in people's heads that they forget how big it is. So that doesn't help with finding the line.
Us, there's no clear definition of Eastern and Western European, so we thought we'd ask our audience to see what they think. Fortunately, 8,779 TLDR viewers headed to our poll, casting a total of about 400,000 rankings. We asked them to tell us if they thought each European country was in the East or the West, and having aggregated that data, we can now draw a line that divides the two sides. It's worth saying though, that we did actually have two different surveys. In one poll, we asked people if the nations were in the East or the West without any geographical hints, with us explicitly telling them not to look at maps. In the other poll though, we gave voters maps, marking exactly the country they were assessing.
I'm confused though, because they are not including Russia in this, are they? Like, Russia is in Europe. It is on the European continent. It's also on Asian continent as well, but it's got both. But it's not including that at all. So even looking on a map, it's misleading. I don't know if this is very accurate or not.
We did this as we were interested if knowing the exact geographical location of the countries would impact people's intuitions. Anyway, before we get into that data, let's draw the line. Some countries very clearly fell on one side of the line or the other. More than 99% of people put France, Spain, Germany, Italy, Ireland, Iceland, the UK, Denmark, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg in the West. And all of these other places had more than 90% West votes. On the other side though, it was a little less cut and dry. 13 countries were almost unanimously voted as Western, but only one country got more than 99% East, Belarus. Getting more than 90% east though, we had Ukraine, Moldova, Bulgaria, Turkey, Romania, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania, North Macedonia, and Kosovo. So, we don't have a clear line yet. We will do by the end of the video, but there is already a clear divide, despite the fact that we've only coloured where the audience was in at least 90% agreement. It's clear geography is a factor here. I mean, those marked in the West are clearly in the West, and vice versa. But it's not the only factor at play. History and culture are other fairly clear dividing lines, with fairly different traditional cultural practices on each side of the continent.
See, the funny thing is, they were talking about Greece, for example. I would probably put Greece as a Western European country. Well, on the map, it's not Western, is it? But then we went to Albania a few weeks ago, and I would have put that on the eastern side. But Albania is literally right above Greece. So your opinion of a country is massively affecting if you think it's eastern or western.
For example, when we look at the level of religiousness for each country, we can see that many, but not all of the most religious countries, fall on the eastern side geographically. It's even clearer when we look at democracy though, with many of the stronger democracies falling on the western side. What about social attitudes? Well, this one shows us each country's feelings on LGBTQ+ rights, with a pretty clear east-west split. Economics is probably the easiest to measure though, with, again, a fairly clear split when it comes to GDP per capita of European nations. This east-west divide isn't strictly true though. There are some countries, like Portugal and Ireland, which are firmly Western geographically, but cross the line on some issues socially, like LGBT rights in Ireland, GDP in Portugal, and the importance of religion in both. Also, the East clearly isn't a homogeneous zone. Some see Russia as a threat, others as a friend. Some are in the Eurozone, and others aren't. Some are in Schengen, and others aren't. Some think of themselves as more Northern and Nordic, while others have stronger V4 and Balkan identities. That's what makes drawing a line so difficult. Besides straight geography, there's no clear definition of what makes a country feel intuitively Eastern or Western. And when Eastern is often used as a synonym for poorer, less progressive, and less democratic, it's easy to understand why some would want to shrug off the label. In fact,
that is exactly what I was talking about and what I've learnt about Poland. A lot of people think of Eastern as the old Soviet, poorer, not as democratic. And so countries that have got rid of communism, they want to progress normally, most of them, generalising obviously, they want to progress to being a Western country. But that's, even then, that's not thinking about geographically, that's thinking about culture, isn't it? And democratically and things like that. I don't think it's easy, but I would also say, a lot of people say, well, Poland is actually central, but how often do we ever say central? We normally say Western or Eastern. We don't often say central. So it's only taken into those two into account.
In fact, it's that stigma that might explain why only one country was almost unanimously voted Eastern in the same way all of these were almost unanimously voted Western. People, especially those living in these countries and areas, are cautious of the Eastern Europe label. And for good reason, with it often hijacked by populists across the continent. In fact, if we look at the countries we've marked as Eastern European thus far, and separate out the people voting from those countries, the average score they receive is consistently more Eastern than the label they give themselves.
Yeah, it's all
with
about opinion.
Every country on this list thinking of themselves as less Eastern than the continent as a whole sees them. That said, let's fill in some gaps and see where the line is drawn by our audience. 89% of people put Montenegro in the east, and 87% put Lithuania and Latvia in the east, slightly more than the 79% Eastern scored by their northern neighbour of Estonia. Both Poland and Hungary came in at 85% Eastern, while Slovakia was 84% and similarly named Slovenia was 66%. Despite being significantly further east, Cyprus scored the same as Croatia, with 73% of people putting them in the east. The very close nations, though, were the Czech Republic, Greece and Finland, with the latter being the only ones sneaking into the west. Despite being pretty far east geographically, its Nordic connections pulled Finland west in your eyes. Greece and Czechia both slipped the other way though, with them scoring 58 and 59% Eastern respectively. With all of these countries coloured in then, we can finally draw a line dividing the continent based on your votes. But does this line make sense? Well, geographically, kind of. It definitely bends a fair bit to let Finland into the west, but all in all, it's a pretty geographically accurate line. But what about the factors we mentioned earlier, though? Well, it does seem that the line drawn does fit fairly well with the statistics we discussed earlier, such as GDP per capita, strength of religious convictions, LGBTQ+ rights, and democracy. But as we discussed earlier, this isn't a straight geographic split on any issue, and potentially the label Eastern European isn't even all that useful. Finally though, as I mentioned at the start, we showed some respondents a map when they were ranking, while others were told not to consult maps. For a lot of countries, seeing the map made no difference. Generally, those pretty clearly on one side or the other, with the exception of the Czech Republic here. The other countries though saw a more notable shift between map viewers and non-map viewers. Now, the ones in blue, people rated as more Western once they'd seen the map, and those in orange, people thought of as more Eastern when they saw their real geographical location. The biggest shift was for Malta, which saw a 7 percentage point shift between those seeing and not seeing the map, with map viewers ranking it as more Western than non-map viewers.
I always thought
Notably
Malta was
though,
more Western
2.7% of respondents very honestly admitted that they didn't know enough about Malta to judge it. And this seems to track across many of the other countries that had big shifts depending on whether people saw the map or not. All of these places had at least 2% of people said they didn't know them. And many of them are also the ones that saw the biggest difference between map and non-map results. These countries also tend to swing further west when people are shown the maps and find out their real location, suggesting that if people don't really know a country that well and didn't have a map to use as guidance, they'd put it further in the east. Notable exception here is Greece though, with those seeing the map rating it as 5 percentage points more Western than those who didn't see the map. Which is a little odd, considering the map quite clearly shows Greece on the eastern side geographically. But who knows? Comment your theories down below. Oh, and before we go, I know you're wondering, here are the countries ranked by the number of people who didn't know them, with San Marino being the least known country on the list. Anyway, here's the overall data and the final line. Do you agree with our audience's verdict? And do you think that trying to divide Europe into East and West is even all that useful? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Please do. Please do let me know your thoughts. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because technically, geographically, there will be a line somewhere, right? There will be a line and the ability to do a clear line geographically. But actually, when we talk about East and West, we're not actually really very often talking about geographically. We're talking about history, culture, democracy, those sort of things that were spoken about in here. So, a lot of my audience, you guys are Polish, and you would say, no, we're not Eastern European. And that actually goes with the chart where it said the people outside of the country voting compared to the people inside. People on the eastern side, like Poland, for example, inside of the country, they voted more Western, but actually the outside opinion is more Eastern. And that makes sense, I think. That makes sense because, outside people aren't living in that country and therefore don't necessarily know what it's like these days. And so I think when it's now East versus West, it is more on the cultural side of things, isn't it? It really, really is, and it's less about if geographically you're east or west, because like I said, I would have always said that Greece is western, even though Albania is right above it, and I would have said is eastern. I would have always said Finland is western, even though clearly it's probably eastern. So it's all about perception and what what you perceive of that country and what you think of the GDP, for example, and what type of, if it's a democracy, if it's not a democracy. It's a tricky one. But give me your thoughts down below in the comments. Please let me know your thoughts. We can all say that the United Kingdom is Western, at least. That's an easy debate, I suppose. Thank you so much for watching. It's an absolute pleasure to be learning these things, and hopefully you guys can maybe learn as well with me. Please do make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you next time. Goodbye.